So that's a hedge that was built to put in place around the garden, and you can see it's a beech hedge. There's only one type of plant in it. Whereas if we look at the hedges around the field here, it's hard to know how old this field is or how old the hedges are. Most of them are between sort of several hundred years old. If we look at the Ordnance Survey maps from the 1830s, this field is on it with the current boundaries. So this hedge is at least, 200 plus years old. When people plant hedges initially, they tend to just use one plant. But if we look at them now, you'll find that there's a variety of native plants get introduced over the years. So walking up, looking at this hedge here, underneath the pylon is some wild cherry, and then we have, I think this is a wild rose that escaped out of the garden. Up there we have some hazel, and then moving up along the hedge, we've got some more wild cherry. This plant here with the wider leaves on it, that's elderflower. You can see in about a month's time that'll be covered in those lovely white flowers that smell of summer. At the moment they're just starting to appear, so they're still green. And then beyond that we've got another bit of wild cherry. And then moving further up the hill, we'll find some whitethorn starting to appear and some blackthorn. So this is a blackthorn bush here. You can see it's got those dark green lobulated leaves, also some briars in there, and some hazel to the left of that. Blackthorn is the one that has white flowers on it early in spring, then the leaves come, and then later in the year it'll have sloes on it, those really bitter berries. Whereas the whitethorn or the hawthorn gets green leaves on it first in spring, then sort of late May into early June it'll be covered in lovely white and pink flowers, and then it'll have haws on it later in the year, little red haws. They're all important native species for pollinators. So if you look at the hedges in this field, you can see the one on this side is quite tall, the one at the very top of the field is shorter, and then the one down the other side opposite us is the shortest of all, the lowest of all. That's because when we're cutting hedges, we try and do only one side of the field at a time. So the hedge over there was cut last autumn, hedge at the top was cut the autumn before, and this hedge on the right was cut at least 2 years ago. The reason for that is that, well, A, it's less work, you're using less fuel and less time if you're only cutting part of the hedges every year, and also it allows the hedges to flower. So hawthorn and blackthorn, they flower on second year growth. So if you cut the hedge every year, they never get a chance to flower, they never produce any pollen for bees and other insects, and they, it's excessive to cut them every year, there's no need. We also want to make sure the hedge doesn't develop gaps in it. You can see there's a small bit of a gap in this one here. If you cut the hedge every year, you get less sideways growth, which can weaken them over time. Pasture then, you can see in against the hedge we've got this about 1 metre wide strip of nettles and briars and grass that hasn't been cut. That's called a headland. If you're using machinery in a field, either a tractor or originally a horse, you can't get right in close to the hedge with the machinery. So the headland refers to the strip of ground between the sward or the usable pasture or the arable crop and the hedge where you turn your machinery or turn your horse. And you can see in this one there's lots of nettles in it, and there's some briars. Again, not a big deal. Nettles, they can sting animals, so discourage, if there was cattle or horses in the field, are less inclined to try and get out through it. And also they are a food plant for some of our native species. So a lot of caterpillars of butterflies, for example, feed on nettles. So my advice is leave them alone. If they're not in the way and not causing any bother, don't feel compelled to get rid of them all. Likewise with the briars, we don't want them out in the field taking over the grass, but a few in the hedge are no harm, and you get blackberries off them in the autumn. So it's all about a balance, I suppose, really looking after particularly say pastures at a veterinary practice. You're not in the business of farming, so having a few native plants isn't going to cause any problems. Looking at the grass then, you can see out here this pasture is mostly grass. We do have some plants or weeds, if you want to call them that, in it. We've got some dandelions here. Dandelions have characteristic yellow flowers and these fluffy seeds afterwards. They're one of the first plants to flower in Ireland in the springtime. So again, they're a very important source of pollen for particularly bumblebees when they emerge from hibernation. The queens come out in the early spring, and they'll use dandelion flowers as a source of feed. So again, don't cut your lawn that often. Let the dandelions flower, they won't do any harm. The other thing they have, if you ever try to pull up a dandelion, you can see you've got this rosette of leaves in the middle that the plant grows out of, and underneath that there's a really long taproot that goes straight down into the ground. If you ever try to pull up a dandelion, you'll know how hard it is. That taproot goes down into the soil, help break it up. One of the problems with using machinery to work on farms in the last 100 years, the weight of the machinery compacts the soil, makes it harder for earthworms to get through it, reduces the amount of oxygen and water and nutrients that can get into the soil. Whereas if you have plants with long tap roots like dandelions, they can help avoid compaction by breaking down into the soil. Whereas if you remember, grass has this shallow interlocking kind of mesh network of roots, so it grows across the surface of the ground, but the roots don't go down very deeply. So it's a very resilient plant. It can cope with being cut repeatedly, but it doesn't have those deep tap roots to reduce soil compaction. You'll also see in this particular pasture we've got a mixture of grasses here. So I'm not an expert on grass, I don't know all the different types, but you can see this one has quite wide leaves, there's a narrow tip. Then we've got some other, this is a softer one. If you feel the leaves, they've got a slightly furry feel to them. And you can see some of them are flowering at the moment as well. So these are the seeds. This particular one has kind of fluffy network of seeds at the top of it. Whereas this grass here has a different shaped seed head. You can see they're narrower and softer. Again, if you run your hands up to them, you'll see the seeds coming off. So this grass is in the process of flowering. Grass is a perennial, it grows from year to year, but it will also produce seeds. Dandelions are perennials, they'll come back every year. Likewise docks, you can see this field was sprayed with a herbicide to kill the docks about 2 weeks ago. So you can see this dock here isn't very healthy looking, it's gone a bit orange. If we look over at the edge of the field, we'll find the docks are more inclined to escape. They're less inclined to get sprayed, so they're healthier looking out here. Likewise the nettles and the plants in here at the edge weren't damaged by the herbicide. But we've got fewer of them now out in the field that was treated. Again, in a veterinary practice, you want to try and avoid having loads and loads of weeds encroaching on the grass, but a few aren't any harm, so I wouldn't get too excited about having some. Remember, a weed is just a plant that's grown where we don't want it to, but sometimes, a bit of balance isn't a bad thing. So I wouldn't get too excited if there's some dandelions and dock leaves and so on in the pasture. As long as there's grass there as well, we're okay. In terms of other flowers, a lot of the traditional flowers that grow in meadows are annuals, which means that every year they have to grow a new plant. That plant has to flower, has to produce seeds. Seeds have to fall onto the ground. They survive over the winter, and then the following spring, new flowers grow again. If we keep cutting pasture, or if you keep cutting your lawn, you stop those flowers surviving from year to year. So the seeds are in the ground, but they can't germinate and grow new seeds and produce a new flower because you keep cutting the tops off them with the mower. So you'll find traditional hay meadows had lots of annual flowers in them. Again, very, very important for pollinators, but the increased use of silage production on farm and the increased use of lawnmowers in gardens has led to a reduction in the annual flowering plants. One of the reasons why we see fewer bees and insects around, because their source of food has been destroyed. So again, with a veterinary practice paddock or lawn, we're not farming, so it's no harm to leave the plants and maybe only cut the lawn, as 2 or 3 times a year if possible. That way you'll have more flowering plants in it and it'll support more wildlife. You can see as you walk up the field here as well, we've got some bluebells in here. Late for them now this year, but they're still there. They like sheltered areas, so they'll grow in at the base of the hazel tree here. There's also some ivy growing through that hazel bush. Again, ivy's no harm, it won't kill a healthy plant or a healthy tree. People say it smothers them, but usually it's because the tree died and the ivy grew up it, as opposed to the ivy killing the tree. You can also see some whitethorn up there, that's the shiny green leaves with kind of rounded edges on it, or indented edges. No sign of any flowers on it yet, it's a wee bit early. And then we have hazel here and some blackthorn. There's also a blackbird's nest in the hedge up here, so I can hear the blackbird give it out. They've just flown away because they're worried I'm a bit too near them, but I'm not going to disturb their nest. You'll also find as you walk around your fields, checking for holes, checking that the animals are all in it, checking that the water supply is intact, you'll get to see what plants grow there, and you'll recognise changes over time. So you can see in there as well, we've got some ferns. We've also got these lovely white flowers. I was always, as a child, we called them shepherd's purse. I don't know if they actually, what their official name is, but they're always in flower this time of the year and they're really nice. We also have up here a local fox that trots across the field every morning, and you can see this is the fox's path through the hedge here. So if you look there, you can see this little pathway that he or she makes. I think it's a dog fox, through the hedge there and into the next field. He then goes straight across the field, and if we go across to the far side of the hedge and looked, there's a similar path through the opposite hedge. So every morning, if you're up early enough, you'll see him trotting across the field here first thing. Can't see them now. There's also some buzzards in the area. They tend to sit on top of the pylons over there, and you'll hear them calling. And also at the moment, there's a lot of insects starting to appear. Again, it's getting into summertime, so they're starting to reproduce. We've also got some wild vetch in here. See this plant with, it's got these little tendrils on top of it, and it's basically a type of a wild pea. So like the peas in your garden, it uses those little tendrils to climb up other plants and get oxygen. Edible as well, but very, very small. Thank your ancestors that cultivated all these wild vegetables into the large garden varieties we can enjoy today. It'd be a long time picking enough veg to make lunch. We've also got a little bit of comfrey up here, if I can see a plant of it. There was loads of it last week. It's probably just starting to finish flowering now. I'll just have a look and see if I can show you any. You can see as well, this is a little seedling that's blown out of the hedge and planted, grown itself in the pasture. That'll get cut back when, at the moment, this field is closed off and we're going to take hay off it later in the summer. So plants like that start to grow out in the pasture, they'll get cut back when we cut the field for hay. So that way you keep the hedge and stop it growing into the field. You can see as well in this particular field, there's a bit of a gap in the hedge here in the corner. There's no livestock. This field has been used for hay for the last few years. There goes the sparrow or the blackbird again and disturbing them. If we were putting cattle out here or horses in this field, we'd have to go and reinforce that corner just to make sure they didn't escape out into my neighbour's field next door, which currently has spring barley in it. He wouldn't be very happy if there's cattle rampaging across his lovely crop. So really important, before you let animals out in the field, go out and walk around the edges and check that there's no weak areas or gaps that they can escape through. If you're dividing up the field, you can use electric fence, but it's important to make sure that the animals are going to be secure, particularly if they're not used to the pasture you're turning them out in and it's new to them. If, for example, it's a veterinary practice and you're letting them out in a small paddock for a few hours with the sunshine and grass, it's really good for them, but they're not familiar with the boundaries. So the first thing they'll do is they'll go and walk around the entire perimeter and check and see where they are and get to know what their surroundings are. So it is important that your boundaries are secure. Okay, we're up on top of the hill now. You can see it's a lovely day. I'm going to pause this now and I'll walk down to the bottom of the field and talk a wee bit about drainage and a few other bits and pieces. Thanks.